All right, everyone, welcome back to your favorite podcast, Imaginary Lines. This is episode 9. And I am Keith Giles, and I am joined, as always, by my dear friend and amazing poet, Darrell Epp. And for this episode, Darrell, you wanted to talk about probably, I think what you said is the greatest Canadian.
It's actually a tie, which I'll get to in a second.
Okay.
But
Neil
this
Peart.
is sort of the.
Is it Neil Peart? Is the other one?
It's kind of funny. Neil Peart was born in born in Hamilton, where I am right now.
Wow.
And when he was a teenager, for a few years he lived in St. Catharines, which is where I lived till I was 19. And the song "Lakeside Park" by Rush is about Port Dalhousie, which is the north end of St. Catharines, which is where the Welland Canal empties into Lake Ontario. And that's where I would sort of hang out in summers when I was in high school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Look at that small world. There was a connection there.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, the third time we've talked about Christian art, sort of, and also the main point of this podcast is sort of celebrating why art is awesome and why it's crucial and essential. So today we're going to talk about William Kurelek, Kurelek. I'll give you a primer in Canadian history. William Kurelek was born in Alberta in 1927. And William Shatner was born in Montreal in 1931. And my dad was born in Manitoba in 1935. And this concludes your lesson in Canadian history. That's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. So those are the three greatest Canadians.
Great.
So William Kurelek was born in a very tiny farming town in Alberta. And his dad was Ukrainian and had come to Canada in the 20s, fleeing the turmoil there. And they lived on a farm and tried to make go of it. And then the farm was too small to sort of succeed. So they ended up moving to a farm in Manitoba. And my grandfather came to Canada in 1925. Well, I guess all my grandparents did pretty much in 25. And my grandmother came here when she was 13. And on the boat from Russia to Canada, there wasn't any food. So to survive when she was crossing the ocean, she had to hunt for rats on the ship and eat rats.
Wow.
Yeah. And then when she got off the boat in Canada, she was on iron lung for about 6 years.
Oh my gosh.
And then by the time she got out of the iron lung, both of her parents were dead.
Wow.
So she didn't have too much of a sense of humor. Yeah. And
understand why though.
Yeah. And then back then, you had kids in the prairies to get the free slave labor.
Right.
And so William Kurelek was really terrified of his father because, of course, he got beat with leather straps, which was what they did back then. And also, he just felt like he wasn't as good with his hands as his dad wanted him to be. So it was just a real strange situation. And the local Hicks beat him up because of his accent, just like my dad. And then so he knew, I don't want to just live on the farm my whole life, and he wanted to be an artist. And he also had this issue where he was very sick, and so then he went to he wound up in the Nethern Mental Hospital, which is in Surrey in England, and he lived there for about 4 years. And the guy in charge of that hospital was a great man named Adamson, who was a pioneer of art therapy. And so he would sort of, instead of just taking insane people and just literally shutting them up in the dark forever,
yeah,
he would have them express their situation through art. And so then William Kurelek made these paintings there. And one of the paintings he made while he was in the insane asylum is called the Maze, which is one of the most famous paintings ever made in Canada, and one of the most famous paintings of the 20th century, where it features William Kurelek on the ground in Manitoba, curled up in a ball in agony, and it shows like a cross section of his body, so you can see the 17 compartments of his brain, and in one compartment he's being whipped by his dad, and in another compartment he's seeing all these different visions and stuff like that. And Van Halen used that painting as the cover for their record Fair Warning.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I remember that. That's wow.
Yeah, so that's like William Kurelek. And so he was in the insane asylum in Surrey for about 4 years off and on. And he would either be like catatonically depressed, or else when he would snap out of it, he would sort of always be cutting himself and slitting his wrists.
Wow.
Yeah. And throughout his whole life, he made several attempts at slitting his wrists that were like very close to being successful. And he's been called the Peter Bruegel of the prairies. He's been called the Norman Rockwell of the prairies. He's been called the Hieronymus Bosch of the prairies.
Wow.
Once he got out of the mental hospital, basically in the space of 25 years, he made 2,000 paintings.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and like Van Gogh, he taught himself to paint by painting, where there are some similarities where if you went to the British Academy, you'd look at Van Gogh and say, these aren't paintings, these are sketches.
Right.
And they say Van Gogh never made a painting, right? Because by the standards of like, it's crazy, right? But again, that's something called snobbery, where if you want to be an artist but don't have money to go to university, what are you supposed to do? Just like kill yourself,
Right. Yeah. Or just give up. Don't you can't be an artist because you have to go through this path. And if you don't walk through these steps, then you're not recognized.
Yeah. And it's funny, like Vincent van Gogh literally said he was going to kill himself so his paintings would be worth more money. So then he did, and as soon as he did, the art critics in Paris like, ooh, let's reappraise him, let's jack up the price.
Yeah.
Right. Like it literally happened.
No,
right?
that is actually really insane, to the point of where artists are usually more popular after they're dead, to the point of like, it's almost like a temptation, like, let me fake my death so that everything will suddenly go up. Right.
Yeah. Sometimes I kind of console myself by thinking that posthumous fame is the best kind.
Yeah.
Because I'm not getting much fame in this life, so it'll probably come later. And I'm thinking that's actually kind of nice in the sense that success has ruined more artists than failure has. Like it's a sad story, but if you look at F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? Like Tender is the Night made him as famous as Justin Bieber when he was 26, and he just didn't have the personality for that, right?
Yeah.
So and he wound up drinking himself to death when he was 44, which is just like ridiculous, right? So if Tender is the Night hadn't sold quite so well, who knows what might have happened,
Right. Yeah. Well, there's also a sense too of if you get too successful too quickly, you sort of lose your hunger, right? It's like, so that's a good question. Like, so if Tender is the Night hadn't blown up, let's say it had a mediocre response, then Fitzgerald would have been like, well, I got to try harder. I got to work harder, right? I got to write a better novel. I got to improve my craft. Like he would have been still pushing and still trying to hit this, to hit this goal. And assuming he didn't give up. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, and who knows, he might have written even better things, but who knows?
Yeah.
It's conjecture.
Well, being an artist is a tough life. There's no way around that. And I do kind of see now why artists are more likely to have problems with addictions, more likely to be a jerk. Because like if you're a plumber, you don't take your job personally, right? Like you just fix a tap and go home and forget about it, right?
Right.
And art making is a bit different than that. But yeah. So and also it's kind of interesting about how now the most celebrated paintings in the 20th century, some of them were made by a guy who was in an insane asylum, which kind of says something about the way our society's set up, right?
Right.
Like if you really want to go into to sign up hard with greed, you can do that and be rewarded for it quite easily, right? But if you're like a shaman or a mystic or a real sensitive person, you'll be a lot more likely to be mocked and made fun of and, be called insane, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he went from Alberta to Manitoba to the insane asylum for 4 years. And then he was given shock treatments, 14 rounds.
Wow.
Which was kind of desperate because they just couldn't find another way to stop him from slashing his wrists, right? And when you get the shock treatments, it kind of messes up your memory. So you're less likely to slit your wrist because you're less likely to do anything at all because you can't remember your own name or whatever, right?
Right.
Yeah. So then starting there, the paintings he made there up until when he died in 77, they're in the National Gallery in Washington. They're in the Smithsonian. They're on the Van Halen cover. They were in Queen Elizabeth's private collection. He was really famous in the 60s and 70s. And even though critics found him so hard to assess, and now his fame has continued to grow, where because he was so prolific, he was hard for critics to talk about. Because on the one hand, he was a surrealist, he was a realist, he painted long series of paintings of farm life. He did the book about just focusing on Polish Canadians, Ukrainian Canadians, all these different little cultures that he knew, and then also more like fantasy paintings, religious paintings. So he was so hard to pigeonhole, that kind of hurt him in the sense it made him hard to talk about, right? So when he got out of the insane asylum, he believed that he'd been cured of his insanity through a miracle. And that he could see and hear Jesus walking alongside him with every step he took.
Wow.
He wrote he wrote an autobiography called "Someone with Me" about that. And he believed that Jesus told him to use his painting gifts to create Christian propaganda that would save Canada from destruction.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because if you say that to the average bear in 2021, they'll say, no, actually, that's proof that you're not cured.
Right. Obviously, he never, he remained insane his whole life. Yeah.
Right. But it's kind of like William Blake, where William Blake was always kind of in a good mood despite living in poverty because he believed his house was full to shoulder with angels and demons of every conceivable rank that he could talk to and that were as real to him as you are, right?
Yeah.
And because he didn't harm anybody and normally paid his bills on time, people just said, okay, whatever floats your boat,
You're right.
But, then there's a question about, what is real? Who is insane, right?
Right.
So then he started making these paintings where he said, and it's kind of funny, like, Fyodor Dostoyevsky, he said, his goal with his writing, his books there, was to save Russia's soul, right?
Wow.
Now in 2021, you might say, man, my goal is to get published in the New Yorker or sell my script to Hollywood or something, right?
Right.
But if someone said, I want to write a book to try to redeem the soul of Texas,
yeah,
you'd say, wow, dude, you've got some issues there, right?
Or you just say, well, good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that. Or else you'd say you're arrogant, right?
Well, right, exactly.
But,
you think you're just going to
yeah.
fix everybody. You're going to write one book and it's going to change everything, right?
Yeah. But that's what Dostoevsky said. He said he was writing to save Russia's soul. So good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then William Kurelek said he was going to use his gifts as a painter to save Canada from a fiery destruction. And
well, I guess he did, right? It worked.
So far. Yeah. And of course, so for example, he was appalled by the way Canada changed its abortion law in the early 70s. So he made this painting where it was painting of, like, I think the Humber River, where the river was like full of, like, bloody, mangled fetuses, right?
Oh, beautiful.
So then you look at that paint and go, yeah, you're against abortion, I get it, yeah, but
I think so, yeah.
there's nothing else you can say about it,
right?
Like, it's just like you said, propaganda, right?
Right.
And that's really not quite how art works. Like, you don't want to have to explain your art. Like, it should be able to speak for itself. And it's like, the cartoonist Steve Ditko, he famously refused to be interviewed for half a century. And it wasn't because he was a hermit. He had plenty of friends, but he wouldn't do interviews. And he said, my work is me. Anything you need to know about me is on the page. My work is me.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I'm going for in my books, where anything you need to know is baked in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But the thing with, but the thing with William Kurelek, this is like Van Gogh, where Van Gogh also wanted to use his paintings to preach, and no one likes being preached at. But in both their cases, they were such weirdos and so unique, and so like, they were talented, but also they were just in that sort of anomaly category of being so different that even if they tried to play it straight, they couldn't. His art is, art therapy. It's Christian art. It's also great art by anyone's standard, and anyone has to reckon with it. So, you could Google right now The Maze. That might be a good, yeah.
Let me look that up. There it is. It comes right up.
Yeah.
Now I have seen. Oh wow.
Yeah.
So the cover, the Van Halen cover, only grabbed a portion of that.
Yeah, basically in The Maze, there's 17 compartments of his brain, and Van Halen just picked a few.
Yes. Yeah. So when you see the whole thing, it looks like almost like a cross section. You said it was his brain, right? So I guess it's a cross section, maybe a skull. Though to me, it's not obvious that it's a skull, but it's a cross section of something round.
Well, if you look, you can see a set of teeth, which kind of should orient you.
Oh, I got it. No, I see it now. Yeah. So yeah, it's really fascinating. When this episode comes out, we'll post images of some of his artwork in the Facebook group. And by the way, we have a Facebook group, so you should check that out if you like the podcast.
Definitely.
I definitely get the Hieronymus Bosch comparisons, because there is that sort of sense of like all these kind of crazy things going on. But yeah, really interesting.
Okay, now Come on, let's see where this is. So type in William Kurelek, Dinner Time on the Prairies. Is that coming up for you?
Yes, I found that one. Yep.
Okay, so basically, that's one of the greatest paintings ever done in Canada, in my opinion. And the idea was he wanted to use his gifts as a painter to preach and blah, 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 which is kind of a tricky project. But like I think I mentioned in the previous episode, this led him to seriously think about how can you make Christian art in the Western Hemisphere in modern times and not be corny.
Yeah.
So that was his sort of challenge, and he really shows you the way. Where, for example, he did a book of nativity scenes where he painted the nativity scene over and over again, but in different Canadian communities. So he painted like a nativity scene that was taking place in a Inuit village, and in a Ukrainian village, and in Kensington Market in Toronto.
Yeah.
And
just trying to. I just looked it up. There's the Northern Nativity. There's some like in an igloo. There's some out in the forest. There's one like in a barn. There's one. Yeah. Very fascinating. In fact, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So Dinner Time on the Prairies. This, like, of course, it's a crucifixion scene, right? And for 2,000 years, like, especially when you had Christendom still, which we lost recently, painting Bible scenes was how you made your living, right? Because the church had the money to spend, right?
Right.
So then you'd always see these things in like medieval art where it was a crucifixion scene, but the people were dressed the way in the style of the painter of the day, kind of. So you're like, hey, wait a minute, what about realism? What about this, right?
Right.
And that's kind of a funny thing where, like, Gauguin did the Yellow Christ, where he had a crucifixion scene taking place in the South Pacific, and all these things, where it's actually kind of an immature thing, I think, to look at like medieval paintings and go, wow, this is supposed to be a crucifixion scene, but they're dressed like they're in Flanders in 1300, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, sure they are, on the one hand, deal with it,
right?
Like the Christian story is true wherever and whenever, right?
Right.
But also, one thing that's really interesting to mention, Rembrandt van Rijn, who's kind of like my hero, of all the great painters of that time, Rembrandt van Rijn was the only one who was a Protestant. And there's rumors that he may have been involved in the Mennonite world, but when it comes to those things, he was very circumspect and didn't talk about it very much. So because he was a Protestant, he avoided like the scenes that paid the bills, like big crowd scenes, and focused on things like famously the prodigal son, and was much more introspective.
Yeah.
And at the time he was painting, happily, Amsterdam was the most multicultural city in the world. So when Rembrandt van Rijn was painting a Bible scene and wanted to sketch in extras, he would actually go stand up and look out his window and sketch the faces of his Jewish neighbors passing by.
Wow.
So he's a famous crucifixion painting where the soldier who's putting the nails into Jesus, he modeled that guy's face over the face he saw in the mirror.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other faces in the crowd were modeled after his Jewish neighbors. So in Van Rijn, for the first time in 16 centuries, you actually have Christian art and Bible scenes where the people actually look Jewish.
Right.
Just because Rembrandt van Rijn cared enough to get up off his ass and look out the window.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly right. Instead of everyone, including Jesus, looking European.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then William Kurelek had this other problem about how to make Canadians care about things that happened in like Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So William Kurelek had this vision of the crucifixion happening everywhere at every time. So that led him to Dinner Time on the Prairies, where it's a really great crucifixion scene, but just opposed to his father's farm in Manitoba.
Yeah.
And about this painting, William Kurelek said, "This is an intuitive painting. I was wondering how to paint a Western religious painting, and suddenly this idea came to me. Sin can just as easily happen on a summer day on a Manitoba farm as anywhere else. The farmer and his sons doing the fencing may have had an argument just before dinner, or one of them may have enjoyed a lustful thought, or got an idea how to revenge himself on his neighbors, etc., etc."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's great.
yeah, so Dinner Time on the Prairies is actually 3 miles west of my house at the art gallery of McMaster University, and I think it's really great. And yeah, after he got out of the insane asylum, he actually went to Israel to try to walk in the places Jesus had walked and all that. And then when he came back, his father had moved again, and his dad had moved to Kingsmount, which is now part of Hamilton. And Kingsmount is like on the escarpment a bit east. So Kingsmount was a village in Stony Creek, and now Hamilton expanded, so Stony Creek is part of Hamilton.
Right.
So if you Google William Kurelek in the autumn of life,
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
yeah. So yeah, that's his dad's farm, and that's about, like I said, about 25-minute car ride from my house, and I've been out there a few times, and the current owners have kind of kept it looking the same way it was in the painting. So if you look at the painting, you'll notice first off, it has if you look really closely, you'll see the people in the painting, and it's a Kurelek family portrait.
Yeah. There's a bunch of people standing in the front yard in front of a very small kind of a farmhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly how the building looks. And something else you might notice, on the horizon, on the other side of Lake Ontario, there is a mushroom cloud rising over Toronto.
Yeah. There is this one big cloud. Yeah. In the background. In fact, that's the only cloud. There's a cloud off to the left.
Yeah, so the Kurelek family is having their portrait taken while the atom bomb has been dropped on Toronto 20 minutes away. And what do you notice on the south side of the street? On the south side of the street, which is the side closest to you.
Yeah. Well, there's all the trees are cut down. There's some dogs around a tree.
Yeah.
Oh, is there someone crucified on the tree?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's great, because it's not facing you. You have to look, and so you're from behind. There's sort of a cross-shaped tree where the branches have been cut off, and the top of the tree is cut off, and you see these dogs. There's like 4 dogs surrounding something, and then if you look closer, yeah, you can see the side of a leg and a head, like someone is crucified to that tree. Wow.
Yeah. So the family dogs are really happy because they're licking up Christ's hot blood.
Yeah.
And,
While the family is taking a picture across the street and a
Yeah.
mushroom cloud is in the background. Wow.
Yeah. So it's a crucifixion scene where Jesus isn't facing you.
Yeah.
He's facing towards the Kurelek family,
Yeah.
who is too busy having their picture taken to pay much attention.
Yeah. Say cheese.
Yeah.
Wow. See, now that kind of stuff is really powerful because I think at first glance, you just go, okay, it's a landscape picture. And okay, oh yeah, there's some people standing in the front yard. It looks like, yeah, okay, picture, yeah. Like it's like it's slowly, you have to stand there and absorb it, or the details, and then you slowly get to the point of like I wonder how long it would have taken me if you hadn't said anything for me to go, hey, wait a second, what's going on right there, and to notice the crucifixion, which is that's really great.
Yeah, it's kind of more apparent when you see it in person as opposed to Google Images. So don't feel too bad for not getting it.
Yeah, I can't seem to get a really full screen picture of it. I'm trying to blow it up, and it's really tough to get a really detailed picture of it.
Well, it's hanging in town here, so you can come over sometime.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. We'll schedule a live and in person episode. Yeah.
So that's a pretty sweet crucifixion scene, and like I said, Rembrandt had this problem of fighting a certain kind of cliche in religious art, and then Kurelek had this other one. So, and Kurelek, this little trick he did here, he did it a few times, where he was just really curious, where if Jesus showed up in Canada today, what would you do? How would Canada react, right?
Right.
So now type in William Kurelek, Toronto, Toronto.
Okay. And those of you playing along at home, I encourage you to Google. You can Google. Please. You can Google right along with us as you listen. And see what we're seeing. Okay.
Well, yeah. When we're talking about a painter, there's no other way really on a podcast to say run to Google or something.
Yeah, and I don't have the video skills to sort of like share. I guess I could actually, to be honest, this is a video and we're on Zoom. I could share my screen and show the artwork, but that wouldn't do any good for people just listening. All right, so here we go. Yeah, this is like it's like you're looking across the street at a building. Like, I don't know what that building is. And there's just a whole bunch of people walking up and down the sidewalk, a bunch of cars, a big bus in the middle, kind of like almost like a rush hour. There's people on both sides just jamming the sidewalks, walking up and down the sidewalks. And then way kind of in the center, off center, is Jesus kind of just standing on the steps of this building.
Yeah, that's actually Jesus standing on the steps of a old city hall.
Okay.
Yeah. Now they have a new city hall in this is funny. In the 70s, they built a new city hall in Toronto where they built it so that when you look at it from the air and look down, it looks like an eye. And a lot of science fiction movies have used Toronto City Hall as a backdrop. And Kurelek really hated the new city hall. And but yeah, that's the old city hall. And they're in the foreground, you can see the TTC, Toronto Transit Commission streetcars, which are electric, which they still have pretty much like that. So Toronto's kind of known for those streetcars. And so again,
so there you go.
You know, Jesus appears.
Can you see that? Can you see the image?
Yeah, awesome, great.
Yeah, there you go. I'm getting fancy now. Go ahead.
That's great. Yeah, so there's Toronto, and so Jesus, who you may have heard of, appears in Toronto and goes to the steps of City Hall where the big shots hang out, and is totally ignored because everyone is too busy going to their appointments and going shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So now that I know how to do this, I could share the other ones too.
Okay, that's probably a good idea.
Let me do that. So I'm gonna go to the Autumn of Life.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
there you
yeah,
go.
yeah.
And then now let me share that. There you go.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, that's Kingsmount, Ontario. Which, if you're not from around here, if you're looking at that painting, if you drove in your car for 35 minutes to the right, which is east, you'd be in Niagara Falls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah,
Wow. That's
and
really
that,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
So now I'll take your word for it because I can't see the super detailed on the cloud in the background, but it looks like there are some things floating in the air. And
Yeah.
is that the indication that that's a mushroom cloud and not just like a regular old cloud? In
Well,
other
I
words,
have
what
to
is the
say,
detail? I can't tell what that is.
yeah, I have to say, like your mushroom cloud looks a bit cropped, so just take my word for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Oh, there it is. I can scroll down a tiny bit. There we go.
yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Cool.
And also he has another painting um, called "This Is the Nemesis," which features my hometown getting nuked, which is kind of a downer.
What's it called again?
This is the Nemesis.
This is the nemesis. All right, I'm gonna pull that one up and oh boy, now that is
Yeah,
glorious. So
yeah.
let
So
me
basically, that's pretty much looking from his dad's backyard.
I can't help it. This is like wow. Okay, so let me see if I can frame this before I share it
Yeah.
here.
And if you see that in real life, that painting is like 4 feet by 4 feet and has a really thick texture to it applied. And so East Hamilton is very industrial. It was a steel town. So there's a mushroom cloud, but it's also like the twisted steel as it's all going up there.
Now there seems to be a person sort of stuck, kind of tangled in this ladder.
Smokestack, yeah.
Smokestack, yeah. It's a ladder on the side of the smokestack, yeah. It's sort of, I guess, being crisped and almost like a hot dog on a coat hanger. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, boy, what a massive man. Okay, so is this sort of like warning people of, like he was saying, he wanted to save Canada from this coming fire and destruction?
Yeah, like I said, even when he was quote unquote cured, he repeatedly had visions of and nightmares about seeing Toronto on fire. Um, and he had these, and he did have these dark visions that gave his work this power and this urgency. So yeah,
Yeah, it's an amazing painting. So I'm going to go back also to a couple other things we didn't get to look at. So I'll pull up the maze also.
yeah, that's the important one. And there's a lot of good writing about that painting. And you know, basically, if you start taking art therapy 101 or talk about that subject at all, the maze will come up because it was such like a landmark case in like basically the creation of the discipline of art therapy.
Okay. I'm trying to adjust this. Okay, so I think I can share this now. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, and you're
Yeah,
right. Now I do see, now that I can blow it up, I do see the teeth. So yeah, kind of looking into the back of the skull.
yeah,
Wow. That is a very depressing, wow, but just amazing. Yeah, you could almost stare at this all day. There's so many, I love things like this where there's so much great detail.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like a diagram where like here's his head and like here's like the blow up part that's over here, right?
Right.
But yeah, so there's 17 chambers of his mind, which feature his memories of the prairies, his memories of his dad, life in the insane asylum, and all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just so really great. Wow. And also, I guess off to the right, to the far right, you can see there's also a maze. But I guess as I look at it, I think what I'm seeing is it's the other half of his skull that's been pulled back.
Yeah.
I think yeah, you could basically take these two pieces and put them together. And what we're seeing is it's been pulled back. Because there are some little bits of tissue or something kind of connecting the big one you're looking at to the one on the right, like it was been pulled back. Wow.
Okay. Now, since we're on the subject, go to your Google and type in William Kurelek pre-maze. PRE-MAZE.
Pre-maze. There it is.
Yeah.
And now it's just a single picture of a guy in a tub or something, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let me blow this up. Oh, there we go. I think that'll work. That's interesting. Oh, hold on, quick. Let me share this here. Boy, those of you watching a video, you're getting a treat.
Yeah.
Our first ever
Mime. Yeah.
our video presentation. So now that looks like so that looks like a doll of some kind with a gag.
Yeah.
And or it's a man with his head in a sack, but it looks more like almost like a scarecrow type character. He has gloves on his hands and he's wandering this circular. Oh, actually, you can see, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but there's a detail of like footsteps. So like this person has been walking in a circle for a long time. The footsteps just continue to go around and around in a spiral. And there's one chair at the back. There's a bunch of doors. Yeah, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's a self-portrait of before he got to the maze. Yeah. And then oh yeah, actually there's one I really like. Type in William Kurelek, A Devil's Wedding.
Right, hold on a minute.
Yeah, sure.
I want to close some things out. I feel like I got too many things open. All right, so what it's called?
Yeah, no problem.
What's it called?
Devil's Wedding.
Devil's Wedding. You know what? I'm not sure. A bunch of different things come up, so I'm not sure which one would actually be the Devil's Wedding.
Okay, well, it's basically like a strip that looks like an L.
Say it again. It's a what?
What is coming up for you?
A bunch of different things. Oh, did you say it looks like an L?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think maybe this is it. Okay, I'm going to pull this up, and I think this is it. It is the first thing. Oh, there it is. Okay, it is the first thing that comes up, although for some reason it's on Pinterest. No, I can't make it go away. Stop.
Okay.
Stop doing the Pinterest thing. All right, I'm not going to use that one because it's too
Okay,
early.
great.
But let me see. It's odd though that why are there so many other things that come up when I do this? Oh, darn, got it.
I can.
Hold on. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is better. All right, I'm going to share this. I think this is it. You tell me if I got it. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. And that's from Kurelek.ca, which is a good place to get stuff. And for the Ukrainian settlers, the Devil's Wedding is what they called a twister.
Right. So in Texas, we call it, oh, doggone it, I just forgot it.
Oh, man.
It's a dust devil. So we call them dust devils.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
So obviously the prairies are really flat. It's really strange. And the Devil's Wedding was something that they really dreaded. So here you see one guy running away from this twister that's appeared. And it's just such a smart painting because it's basically the whole image is created out of slicing up color and form.
Mhm.
Where it's got a great sky, it's got this great sense of movement from the dust being whipped around and the guy running, but it's all about just these shapes,
Yeah, it
and it's just
is.
really
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you can almost get the sense, like if this was if this was a video and I could click play on
Yeah,
YouTube, I could predict that where that dust devil is going to go. It's going to follow that guy. It's going to go to the right and then it's going to come down, just like the L. Right, it's going to go this way and then it's going to come down towards the camera or towards the viewer, or at least that seems to be the suggestion of like what's going to happen. And this guy's like, "You better run."
yeah. That painting is actually really smart in terms of perspective and composition. That's actually really great. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And then there's one, type in William Kurelek, I spit on life. I spit on life.
That's lovely. All right,
Yeah.
so let me oh, here we go. Oh, wow. So now this is closer to like the maze in style. I'm not going to choose the Reddit. There's a Reddit post. I'm not going to use that one. So let me try this. Oh, this is interesting. This is under the Institute of Mental Health.
Yeah.
Can I enlarge this? Okay, good. There's the enlargement. I'm going to see if I can make it any bigger. I can't. So I'm just going to share this. Oh. So there we go. So that one's a little smaller. I can't enlarge it any bigger
That's
than
cool.
that.
Yeah.
But it's similar to the maze in the sense that you got separate scenes. Yeah. So, and then so there is a the bottom right. The "I spit on life" is a sign hanging on the back of someone. It looks like they've hung themselves.
Yeah.
Go away, you don't exist. Interesting.
Mhm.
So there's another sign. There's yeah, someone is holding the sign, "Go away, you don't exist." But it looks like to a death, and death is about to, looks like, cut his head off. This is a dark painting.
Well, this is kind of where the art therapy angle comes in, where the
Right.
idea is like, if you really think life is meaningless, making art that says life is meaningless, that's a meaningful act. That's a hopeful act. Just by doing something, just by getting up and doing something.
Right.
So this is a painting that helped him, keep on going, right?
Right.
No,
it's really
so
fascinating.
William Kurelek, he has 2,000 paintings. He has paintings like this. He has pastoral scenes. He has a lot of paintings about the Ukrainian community in the prairies, the Polish community. Many paintings about the Passion Week, about Christian themes, and all these things like that. And then in the 70s, he went to build a bomb shelter in his house, and then the city of Toronto wouldn't give him a permit for it because his bomb shelter was so half-assed. So he kind of converted his bomb shelter into a studio, and he would work endlessly in this hole in the ground with no ventilation, breathing in all these aerosols. And then his friend said, "Bro, you're going to kill yourself from breathing in all these aerosols." And he's like, no, I can't die. I'm on a mission from God, right? I got to save Canada's soul, right? And then basically he got liver cancer and died when he was 50. And one thing he wanted to do was he wanted to see the town where his dad was from in the Ukraine. And because it was the Soviet Union days, his application to go there took 9 years to get processed. So he finally went to see his dad's old town in the Ukraine. And then when he came back to Toronto, he died a few weeks later when he was 50.
Wow.
And now it's the same old story like Van Gogh, where his paintings sell for millions and all this stuff. But it's just, and his life story is very strange. Like, there's no way around. He was a strange guy, but he certainly did the best with the hand he was dealt.
Yeah.
And it's actually a very inspiring story. There's all sorts of great art that we love that has been created by people who are living in poverty. You know, like Dante wrote the Inferno when he was in exile, living in poverty before he died of malaria and all this. There's all kinds of examples. And also, it's just interesting about how, like, he viewed himself as a missionary, using his paintings to save the day and bring the truth of his buddy Jesus and all this. And his body of work is so compelling and so unique and so accomplished that even if you weren't a Bible thumper and a Bible belt, he's someone you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate you taking the time to show us this guy's work, because I wasn't familiar with it other than the very odd Van Halen reference, which a lot of people don't like that album. That's actually, I really love that album. Most people are like, oh, that's not one of their Van Halen's better albums, but I think it's great. But yeah, I mean, like, so I'm looking, actually, I found there's a website here talking about the maze, and it says, talking about the maze, it says, this was Kurelek's way of showing his doctors what their job was. He writes in his autobiography about this painting, the maze: "Now clean me out. I challenge you scientists and put me back together again. A happy, balanced, mature, fulfilled personality. Lift that rat out and unwind him and let him run free." So I guess the thing is, in that painting, there is a rat. And in a way, that rat sort of symbolizes himself. So yeah, that's just wow. Oh, he says also, I had to impress the hospital staff as being a worthwhile specimen to keep on. So I guess he felt the need to perform and prove that he was making progress or something.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, what a fascinating person. And I think, so, you know, getting back to the sort of bigger topic, you know, we, like you said, for 3 episodes now, we have been critiquing and evaluating Christian art. Initially, we talked about why so much Christian art is bad, because there's no depth to it. It wants to just too quickly give you this formula of, well, just be a Christian, everything will get better. Like, that's why I hate Christian films, because most Christian films, that's what it is. It's like the guy has struggles and he's an alcoholic and he beats his wife and he lost his job. But then, you know, someone says, be a Christian. And he prays a prayer in the rain, crying. And the next day his wife comes back. It's almost like a country song. His wife comes back, he gets his job back, everything's happy again, the end. And it's like, but it's so corny and fake and unreal that, you know what I mean? Like, even a Christian, I mean, I'm a Christian, and I look at that stuff like I can't watch those movies. They make me angry, and I think they're cheesy and stupid, and they reduce the whole thing to this ridiculous formula that doesn't look like, you know, real life, and it doesn't even look like what it means to be a Christian. So so that was our critique, sort of that sort of bad Christian art. And then we last episode sort of talked about, but what makes, you know, in some ways, how almost all great art in some ways is Christian, even if that isn't the intention of the artist, because it's speaking to similar themes, right, of redemption and hope and resurrection and transformation and all that. And so in this episode, being able to look at William Kurelek as an example of what makes great Christian art, I think this is really wonderful, because again, he's not a guy that had it figured out. He wasn't a guy who was, oh, look at me, I'm a Christian, everything's wonderful. He had a lot of problems, he had a lot of struggles, but his faith was sort of his lifeline to stay alive and to create. Like, that's what gave his life and his art meaning, right, and purpose.
Yeah. First off, when you mention Christian movies, I guess you're meaning like about like what's an example? Like God is Not Dead or something?
God is Not Dead or Fireproof.
Yeah, Fireproof. That's
or Left Behind, the Left Behind series. Any
Yeah.
film produced by a Christian, specifically Christian studio, starring only Christian actors. You know what I mean? A Christian movie made by Christians for Christians, and yeah, that kind of stuff.
Actually, with those movies, my personal pet peeve of them is all those Christian movies. They all feature people who are upper middle class, where where all those Christians, they own cars, which I don't have, and they have. So I just watch these movies and think, wow, Christians are people who own things that I don't have, right?
Right.
And in those movies, you would never see a Christian who's living in poverty.
Right.
Which is the
no,
reality.
but you might see at the beginning a non-Christian who's homeless and he's drug addicted and he's an alcoholic.
Bad choices.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he meets a Christian, and then the Christian turns his life around, and at the end of the movie, he will be living in a house and driving a car. And he has a job. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know Christianity's true because he doesn't have to take the bus anymore like I do.
Amen. Hallelujah, brother.
Yeah.
I'm never taking the bus again. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah. So that's the first thing I notice. When I watch a Christian movie, I just go, wow, Christians, they all own things that I don't have. Way to go, you know?
Yeah.
And the funny thing about the end time stuff that I feel like mentioning, just in passing, it's funny how when people talk about eschatology, they never mention how gauche it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of like manners. Like with the end times theology, what happens is like you know how in the 1970s and 80s, when Hal Lindsey was doing his thing, life in North America was pretty good, right?
Right.
You know, people had 2-3 cars and a boat, whatever. So then the end times people are like, they could sort of titillate people by saying, in 1988, things are going to get really bad, and you'd better make sure your faith is strong to survive the tribulation, because a little bit down the road, things are going to get really bad, right?
Right.
And the really cruel and rude and gauche thing about that is, while they were having these fantasies and working out their charts, horrible things were happening in the world.
Right.
And there were actual human beings,
yes,
who were going through tribulation.
Yeah.
But they just didn't care.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's funny because we were just my wife and I and my mom were just talking yesterday about there's a very great movie, and I would actually call this a good Christian film again, but not the bad kind we're talking about, but like a great film that happens to have some really beautiful Christian themes, and it's called Hotel Rwanda, and it's a true story. I used to remember his name, Rusasa Kubinga, something like that. He had a horrible, very difficult name to pronounce, but Rusasa Kubinga or something like that. Anyway, it's Don Cheadle is in it, and it was during the Rwandan genocide, and that happened during that kind of that time frame, and I didn't know anything about it. I was oblivious to that stuff because I think O.J. Simpson was on, that was taking over the airwaves at the time. So this, I guess, it was a little later, like 90s, but still, it's like, yes, horrible, horrific, sort of in time level genocide was going on in Rwanda. And even when it managed to get to American airwaves, there's even a scene in that film where there's a cameraman, and he goes out and he films the atrocities, and he manages to smuggle the tape out to get it on the airwaves. And he's like, and so this African guy Rwandan guy who's like, oh, good, Americans will see the truth, and then they will come and rescue us. And Nick Nolte's in it. I think he's the cameraman, and he says, No, no. He goes, well, I'll tell you what'll happen. They'll sit there watching it as eating their TV dinners, and they'll watch that and they'll say, wow, that's really horrible. And then they'll change the channel and they'll watch something, and they'll watch something else on TV, and they'll go on with their life. And the sad thing is that is exactly what happened. So yeah, you're right. That's been going on a long, long time. And it's like, until the suffering is my suffering, it's not really suffering. I don't really care about it, right? It's happening somewhere else. Well, that's what they get for not being Americans.
Yeah. Yeah. So just imagine if in 1994, you talk to a Rwandan and say, you should say the sinner's prayer because Jack Van Impe says that the barcode is the mark of the beast and Saddam Hussein is the Antichrist.
Right.
Right. At the very least, wouldn't you say you're an ill-mannered cunt?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because
like
you're
there's a human
oblivious to
being,
it.
like there's an actual human being in front of you.
Right.
Like, so basically it seems like the end time stuff is like a victory lap for people who are doing really well.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Oh yes. I'm getting ready to, I'm actually preaching here locally at a church. They're finishing up a series on Revelation. And my friend who's the pastor said he wanted me to wrap up the series and preach the seventh, because seven is the biblical number, right? The seventh sermon in the series. And that's what I'm going to talk about, is that this idea of like this whole fantasy of the end times. First of all, it's something that John Nelson Darby put in people's heads in the 1830s. Before that, Christians, like, think about this, 1,830 years, Christians did not think this way. But what happens is once Darby puts this idea in people's heads about this end time rapture theory, which feeds into the whole Left Behind series, all that, Thief in the Night and all that garbage. So it first enters Christian imagination around the 1830s. And then lo and behold, a few years later, is the first time we have people saying, predicting dates of when Jesus is going to come back, and people, selling their houses and quitting their jobs and divorcing their wives and living up in the mountains and waiting, because Jesus is coming back next week. And then he doesn't. And then a couple of years later, some other guy says, oh, I figured it out. Here's the date. So that whole date setting, thing, again, that started immediately after Darby put this idea in people's heads. And we're still stuck on this. We're still, even if you're not in the extreme of like, setting dates and picking dates of when it's going to happen, we still have this mindset that, well, let's just wait for Jesus to come back because it's going to be really soon. It's any day now.
Right.
Right. Well, what that really does is it makes us sort of twiddle our thumbs and spin our wheels, and we're just going to wait for Jesus to come back and fix it. So it creates this apathy and this inaction, which I think the church has suffered from ever since. And I think we need to break out of that spell of, well, Jesus is going to come back and fix it. Well, people have been thinking that for a long time. Maybe you should act as if that isn't going to happen and do something.
Well, first off, if you think about the waste of human capital, that's a really sad part of it, where you know how life is a brutal zero-sum game and you only have so many hours, right? So think of all the man hours that people spend playing pin the tail on the Antichrist when they could have been watching the Rockford Files or going for a walk or doing a million other good things.
Right.
Instead of like terrorizing children with these stories, right?
Right.
Also, like John Hagee, he proved that because the 4 blood moons, the world ended 4 years ago.
Oh, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he has a ranch with 20,000 acres and a jet, right? And
of course, yeah, you need that so you can escape the Antichrist.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you believe Jesus was coming back, you'd be selling your jet as fast as you could.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So the people who say the world ending soon, they still make long-term investments.
Of course they do. Yes, and they do building campaigns to enlarge their churches so they can bring more people in. Yeah. It's you start to notice, hopefully after a while, that, yeah, this seems to be a bit of a scam. I'm not sure that the people who say they believe it the most really believe it. Because here's the thing, especially that end times thing, it's a huge moneymaker because people are obsessed with this idea of, the future and tell me how the world's going to end and all that kind of stuff. And they will keep buying. This is the thing about it. That all of these people, who have written these books, John Hagee, Hal Lindsey, Jack Van Impe, all these guys. Here's the one thing they all have in common. They're all wrong. They've all been proven wrong 100% of the time, every time. And you know what? They could put out a book tomorrow and sell 1 million copies. It doesn't hurt their popularity that none of them have ever been right. Hal Lindsey had said that the 80s would be the final decade of humanity. He literally said that. Oops. But guess what? Like you said, he's got like a massive house in Malibu that, you could land a helicopter on the roof. So does he really think that? Or he doesn't really care because, man, those royalty checks are pretty sweet.
See, also, do you ever notice how there's nobody who ever says, I'm a Christian, I've cracked the Bible code, and I have proof that Jesus will return in the year 3782?
There you go. So just relax.
Right? Well, I mean, what if he said, this is what the signs point towards?
Yes,
right?
we have 1,000 years.
You're still going to have to get through your life where you wind up in a nursing home and all those humiliations without any help.
Yeah.
There's no magical ending here. Right. You're stuck here in the mud, right? But I can prove it ends in 3800 AD, right?
Right. So that's a great idea. I should write a book. Let's see. How do I do this? I don't want to, because there was the 88 reasons why Jesus will return in 1988. But I don't want to write a book 3,000 reasons why Jesus will return in 3,000 because that's too big.
38 reasons he'll return in the year 3800.
There you go.
And that can tie into.
There you go.
And that can tie into Planet of the Apes, of course.
Of course. Yes, there you go. Because the thing is, you can't. I think that may be the better way. Because I did write a book where I tried to say that actually the Bible doesn't say Jesus is coming back physically the way you've been told by Darby and your pastor and John Hagee. But I don't know if that would work because it feels like people have even said to me, well, it's like I'm taking something away from them. So because people emotionally, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, they want to believe that this thing is going to happen. So you're right. So maybe the better way is not to try to convince them that the thing isn't going to happen because psychologically people don't want to let go of it. But you have to convince them that it's going to happen. It's just going to happen so far into the future that you now are forced to live your life right now. And maybe that's a better way to approach it. I don't know.
Yeah. About what you were saying about it doesn't matter if you're wrong or not. That's kind of interesting. Like, I remember when the Y2K bug happened, or didn't happen, I guess.
Right, of course. That was another one. Yeah.
I was talking to a coworker because we were sitting around and like one coworker was talking about the signs and Revelation, all this, and about how there's an eagle in Revelation, which means the USA, right? Because and the bear in Revelation means Russia and all this.
Of course.
Stuff,
oh yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
So it's going to be like Rocky IV, right? and then this friend of mine said, "Okay, great. What about us?" And then this other guy said, "What do you mean?" And then my friend said, "I'm from Pakistan."
Right.
And he said, "There's 100 million of us. What about us?" And then the other coworker said, "You're not in here."
Wow.
So we said, "Okay, great. So you're saying it's not for me. Great."
Right. Yeah. And so here's the thing, though, about that. The funny thing about that is that the person saying that is that America's not in there either. Like the eagle, just so you know, and you can go look this up in history, the Romans had an eagle on their standard, on their flag that they flew, and the Romans had eagles on their shields. So if a guy in the first century is writing about something that at the very first chapter of the letter of Revelation says Jesus says these things are going to happen soon and quickly, and these things are soon to take place. And then he talks about these armies that are signified by an eagle. It's Rome, because that's what was going on. It's Rome. Yeah. And so, yeah, we this is the problem, right? We bought into this idea that Revelation is about something far, far in the future, or in our very own near future, rather than something that was in, like, in the first century, their future, their present, or their near future. So yeah, that's the biggest problem, I think, is that Christians have bought into that all these things are unfulfilled, and that the reality is actually all that stuff already happened.
I gather you've written a book about this.
I actually have, yes. If you're curious, it's called Jesus Unexpected: Ending the End Times to Become the Second Coming. And there's so much, man. It's a deep topic. So let's not get into it here, because we're supposed to be talking about
I'll just make one more point about that. Like, you were talking about how in their scam, it doesn't matter if they're wrong, and like how Lindsay can update his book and sell more, right?
Yeah.
I think that's something that's actually kind of simple in one sense, where people like to hear what they like to hear.
Yeah.
And how if I went to your church and you had a sermon and said homosexuality is a sin, right? I'd be sitting there and I'm thinking, well, in the upcoming week, I wasn't planning on turning gay, so great, right?
Right.
There's nothing you're saying to get under my skin.
Right.
There's no problem, right?
Right.
So basically, you're saying this activity that doesn't appeal to me is bad. So I'm like, sure, whatever, right?
Right.
But if you were to stand up in your pulpit and say, holy cow, the Bible here says gluttony is bad. Says if you're a glutton, you might burn in hell for all eternity.
Right.
And it mentions gluttony like hundreds of times.
Right.
I personally am a glutton. So if I heard that sermon, I'd be less likely to put some coins in the plate.
Right. That's I think you figured it out, Darrell. I think you're ready now to start your own church, because you understand how this works.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. Yeah.
So to what you were saying before, what is art for? For William Kurelek, it was life and death, and I think that's how it should be. Like, I think if people read my books, they can kind of tell that I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking to sell out to Hollywood or something like that. And also, if your art is phony, anyone can smell it. Like, remember a few years ago, there was a book series called Mortal Engines, and they were so confident in it, they filmed the sequel at the same time they filmed the first one.
Yeah.
And it totally tanked.
Right.
Because the public in general just kind of smelled it and said, wait a minute, you're just trying to cash in on the Twilight thing.
Right.
Because Twilight just ended. Now people want the new Twilight. You're like, hey, look at me, I'm the new Twilight. And people are like, this just feels false, pass.
Right.
So it's a huge bomb, right? Because anyone can like smell that.
Yeah.
So there's that at play. But basically, William Kurelek was a man who suffered greatly, and in a way that is inspirational and also makes us thankful. He found a way out of the maze.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's right. Yeah, and I think before we hit record, you were kind of making that similar point about how when people look at a piece of art and say, "Well, I could do that," or "What's the big deal in that?" Right? When you say that and you have that reaction to art, sometimes you're discounting the fact that for that artist, it was about life and death. He had no choice, or she had no choice but to paint that painting or write that book or create that work of art, because for them to not do that would have been to die. Whereas for you, it would have been oh, I got some free time on a Saturday. I'm going to take a bucket of paint, go splash it against the wall and see what happens. Like,
Right.
right, for you, then it wouldn't be the same thing. The point is, you couldn't do that because it didn't mean, like you said, it wasn't life and death for you. Whereas for the real artist, the art that they're creating is about life and death for them. And you're missing the point if what you're doing is just critiquing the technique or something.
And that's why it's funny when people say, "Where do you get your ideas?" It's like, well, William Kurelek got his ideas from being abused by his father. He got his ideas from taking an overdose of sleeping pills, from like slitting his wrists.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to recommend that to you in like, creative writing 101.
Let's hope not. Anyway, yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
But these things, but like this is life, right? And it's not things you hear about in Sunday school. But Kurelek is like, how like because of things like maybe the Left Behind movies, Christian movies are synonymous with crap movies, right?
Yes.
But nobody can write off Kurelek in the same way. So the thing is, Kurelek was one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, and he was also a great Christian artist. Deal with it, right?
Yeah.
So again, we see like here's a guy who says, Jesus saved me. It was a miracle. Take it or leave it. But also, I'm using this Christian lens to diagnose these other problems in society that are real problems and things that don't change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, that to me is what makes great art. And yeah, this was great. I really appreciate you walking us through Kurelek's art and life. And this has been awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah, and when you post it, I'll try to put a bunch of links to some nice articles about him, because he's a visual artist, so the conversation should have that element to it and whatnot. Yeah, great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you. Great.
All right.